They're attacking Earth? The Galactic Council watched in horror. The alert hit every screen in the chamber at the same time, and I knew before I read a single word that something had gone terribly wrong. Not because of the red classification tag pulsing in the corner of the display. Not because of the automated warning tone that cut through the murmur of 1,000 alien delegates mid-sentence. I knew because of the silence that followed. In 112 cycles of service on the Galactic Council, I have never heard that chamber go quiet. Not during the shale famine. Not during the Outer Rim collapse. Not even when the Torvon Imperium threatened secession and parked a war fleet outside Nexus Station. There is always noise in that room, always someone arguing, always someone filing a protest, always some junior diplomat tripping over their own ceremonial robes. But in that moment, there was nothing. Just the hum of the station's life support and the slow, rhythmic blinking of the alert on 100 different screens. I am Ambassador Velthrin of the Keth Dominion. I have 4 arms, gray skin that cracks when I am stressed, and a memory that stretches back further than most species care to imagine. I have spent the last 32 cycles assigned to a committee that most council members do not even know exists. We call it the Human Observation Committee. Our job is simple: watch Earth, study the humans, and above all, make absolutely certain that nothing in this galaxy ever gives them a reason to look up from their little blue planet and start paying attention to the rest of us. We failed. The alert was a military dispatch from the Vraxian hegemony, broadcast on open channels for the entire council to receive. The Vraxian ambassador, a broad-shouldered creature named Dravek, with more teeth than sense, had risen from his seat before the message even finished scrolling. He stood in the center of the chamber, with his chest pushed forward, and his 3 eyes gleaming, with what I can only describe as pride. He announced that the Vraxian hegemony had dispatched a fleet of 200 warships to the Sol system. He called the humans a primitive infestation. He called their world ripe for harvesting. The Azuri delegation had gone pale. Their lead diplomat, a slender being named Shelana, whose species communicates partly through bioluminescent color shifts, had turned a shade of white, I had never seen on an Azuri before. She was shaking, not with anger, with fear. He was not looking at the screens. He was not looking at anything. He was sitting perfectly still, and I realized he was doing something I had never seen a Torvon do in public. He was praying. Dravek was still talking. He was explaining how the Vraxian fleet would establish orbital superiority within hours, how the primitive human defenses would crumble, how the hegemony's superior technology would make this the easiest conquest in their history. He was quoting projected casualty ratios. He was smiling. I wanted to explain to him why every senior member of this council, every species that had been here long enough to read the classified files, every diplomat who had ever sat on my committee and reviewed the data we had gathered over 3 decades of watching humanity, was currently experiencing something between panic and despair. But my throat closed around the words, and all I could manage was a dry, clicking sound that my translator did not even bother to convert. The delegate from the Pelori Communion, a small, furred creature whose species had first contact with humans 80 cycles ago and immediately petitioned to have them classified as a galactic-level threat, was already leaving the chamber. I saw her pull out a personal communicator as she walked. She was calling her homeworld. I knew exactly what she was going to tell them. Run. I need to explain something, because what happened next will not make sense unless you understand what the Galactic Council knows about humanity, and what the Vraxians clearly did not bother to learn. Humans are not primitive. Their technology is young, yes. They are still burning fossil fuels and arguing about the composition of their atmosphere, and sending fragile tin cans into orbit around their own moon. By galactic standards, they are children. But technology is not what makes a species dangerous. The Council placed humans under Observation Protocol Omega-32 cycles ago. That is the highest threat classification we have. It has been used exactly twice in the history of the Council. The first time was for the Krell Swarm, a silicon-based hive intelligence that consumed 11 star systems before it was stopped. The second time was for humanity. We did not classify them because of their weapons. though their weapons are troubling enough. They split the atom and immediately turned the result into a device capable of flattening cities, and then they used it, on each other, twice. And then they built thousands more, and pointed them at each other, and spent an entire generation living under the shadow of self-inflicted extinction, and they did not collapse. They did not descend into chaos. They wrote songs about it. They made jokes. They raised children in houses built within range of weapons that could have ended their species. And those children grew up and had children of their own. And those children invented the internet and used it to share pictures of their pets. That is what makes humans dangerous, not the weapons. The fact that the weapons do not stop them. They are fragile. They break easily. But they heal. They heal at a rate that our medical scientists initially assumed was a data error. Shattered bones knit back together. Torn tissue regenerates. Their immune systems do not simply fight infection. Their immune systems learn. Every pathogen that enters a human body is catalogued, analyzed, and remembered. The next time that pathogen appears, the human body already knows how to destroy it. Their biology is not a defense system. It is an arms race, and the opponent is the universe itself. We studied their psychology, and that was worse. Humans form attachments to anything. Other humans, obviously. Animals, certainly. But also machines, tools, vehicles, abstract concepts. They will name a robot and then mourn when it stops functioning. They will charge into danger to rescue a creature they have known for less than a day. They will fight and suffer and sacrifice for people they have never met, based on nothing more than a shared sense of belonging. They call this love, or loyalty, or duty, and they consider it their greatest strength, and I am not in a position to argue. We studied their history, and I had to stop reading after the fourth cycle because I was not sleeping. Humans have been fighting each other since before they had words for what they were doing. They have refined the practice of conflict into something between an art and a science. They have entire institutions dedicated to studying how to fight more effectively. They run simulations of their own destruction, so that they can be better prepared for the real thing. They call these war games, and they play them the way other species play music or solve puzzles, with focus and creativity, and something that looks uncomfortably like joy. But the single most terrifying thing we learned about humans, the data point that made the Council vote unanimously to classify them, is this. Humans are persistence predators. In their early history, before they built tools sophisticated enough to kill at a distance, they hunted by chasing their prey across open ground. Not sprinting, not ambushing, just following. still coming. They do not stop. That is the fundamental truth of humanity. Whatever you do to them, however hard you hit them, they do not stop. And Dravik, standing in the center of the Galactic Council chamber with his chest puffed out and his teeth on display, had just sent 200 warships to hit them. I finally found my voice. I stood up on legs that felt like they were made of water, and I said Dravik's name, and he turned to me with a grin that told me he expected congratulations. I said, "Do you know what you have done?" He laughed. He actually laughed. He said the humans were barely capable of reaching their own neighboring planets. He said his fleet would be in orbit within 2 standard cycles. He said this would be over before the humans even understood what was happening. I looked at him, and I looked at the screen still pulsing red, and I looked at Gorath with his head in his claws, and Shelana flickering white with terror, and the empty seat where the Pelori delegate had been sitting before she fled to warn her people. And I said, "You have not attacked a planet, Ambassador. You have reached into the dark and pulled the tail of something you cannot imagine. And now, all of us, every species in this chamber, every world in this galaxy, will live with the consequences." Dravik stopped laughing, not because he understood, because he saw something in my face, something in the faces of every senior diplomat around him, that he had not expected to see. He saw fear. He asked me what I meant, and I could not answer him, because there were no words in any language I speak that could have made him understand in time. In time. That was the problem. There was no more time. The fleet was already in transit. The first shots would be fired within hours. And somewhere on that small blue planet, orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, in a galaxy that had spent 32 cycles carefully, desperately, quietly trying to keep them asleep, the humans were about to wake up. I sat back down and stared at the screens. Around me, the chamber had erupted into noise again, 100 species all talking at once, all afraid, all trying to figure out what to do next. But I was not listening. I was thinking about something a human researcher had written in a document we intercepted during our monitoring operations. It was a simple sentence, buried in a paper about human conflict psychology. We are at our most dangerous when we have nothing left to lose. The observation center is buried in the deepest section of Nexus Station, behind 4 layers of security clearance and a door that does not officially exist on any station blueprint. I had been here hundreds of times over the years, staring at screens that showed me Earth from every angle, listening to intercepted communications, reading translated news reports, watching humanity go about its daily business of being simultaneously brilliant and baffling. On a normal day, the room held 3 or 4 analysts from my committee, quietly taking notes and filing reports that nobody outside our clearance level would ever read. This was not a normal day. 12 senior diplomats from the inner council had crowded into a space designed for 6. The air recyclers were struggling with the mixed atmospheric requirements. Gorath alone displaced more volume than 3 Keth, and his stress pheromones were thick enough that the Azuri analyst in the corner had put on a filter mask. Screens covered every wall, showing real-time sensor feeds from our monitoring satellites positioned throughout the Sol system. And on those screens, the Vraxian fleet had arrived. 200 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system and began their approach in standard conquest formation. I watched them spread across the display like a stain. Their flagship, a massive dreadnought called the Wrath of Vraxis, led the formation with its forward batteries already powered and glowing. Behind it, destroyers and cruisers and troop transports arranged themselves with the mechanical precision of a species that had done this many times before, to many worlds that could not fight back. They broadcast their demands on an open channel, in heavily accented English that they had clearly learned from intercepted human entertainment broadcasts. The pronunciation was so bad that several of our translators flagged it as a previously unknown language before correcting themselves. The message was simple: surrender your world, lay down your weapons, submit to Vraxian authority. You have 1 standard hour to comply. Then they opened fire on the orbital stations. They were not military installations. Earth's orbital infrastructure at the time consisted of a civilian space station used primarily for scientific research, a half-constructed shipyard that was still years from completion, and a network of communication and observation satellites. The Vraxians hit all of them. The space station broke apart in a bloom of white light and spinning debris. The shipyard twisted and folded in on itself, like paper in a flame. The satellites went dark one by one, little lights blinking out across our displays. I counted the seconds. I had been counting since the first shot. I told him I was waiting to see how long the humans stayed silent, because the length of the silence would tell me how bad this was going to get. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 20. The Vraxians continued their approach, moving into orbit around Earth. Their fleet commander, an admiral named Tholvex, began positioning his ships for orbital bombardment over major population centers. He was following the standard Vraxian pacification protocol. Establish dominance, demonstrate willingness to cause destruction, wait for the inevitable surrender. At the 30-minute mark, Gorath looked at me from across the room. His deep-set eyes were steady, but his claws had gouged furrows into the armrests of his chair. "They are not panicking," he said. "No," I said. "That is the worst possible sign," he said. He was right. A species that panics when attacked is a species operating on instinct. Instinct is predictable. You can model it, anticipate it, plan around it. A species that is thinking. And when humans think, when they apply that relentless, creative, terrifyingly adaptive intelligence to the problem of how to make you stop hurting them, the results are unlike anything else in the cataloged galaxy. At the 47-minute mark, something changed. Every screen in the observation center flickered, not because of a malfunction, because a single transmission had just been broadcast from the surface of Earth on every frequency simultaneously, in every known galactic language, including 3 that humans were not supposed to know existed. Someone down there had taken the time, in the middle of an active attack, to translate a message into languages they had never been formally taught, using communication protocols they should not have had access to. The sheer computational effort required to do that in under an hour should have been impossible. The message was 4 words long. "You have our attention." This one measured how long it took humanity to respond with action. The answer was immediate. Our monitoring systems covered the entire surface of the planet, and what I saw in the next 60 minutes is something I will carry with me until the day my species' long lifespan finally runs out. It was not a military response. It was not a government response. It was a species-level response. And the difference between those things is the difference between a single wave and an entire ocean rising. Every armed conflict on the surface of Earth stopped. I need you to understand the significance of that statement. Humans have been fighting each other continuously for their entire recorded history. At the time of the Vraxian attack, there were 14 active conflicts on the planet, some of which had been burning for decades. Soldiers who had been shooting at each other that morning put down their weapons, looked up at the sky, and stopped. Not gradually, not through negotiated ceasefires. They just stopped. All of them. Everywhere. At the same time. Our political analysts had spent years modeling scenarios in which humanity might achieve internal unity. The most optimistic projections estimated it would take a minimum of 5 to 10 standard cycles of sustained external pressure. It happened in less than an hour. Every government on the planet, every military command structure, every chain of authority, pivoted in the same direction at the same moment, as if the entire species shared a single nervous system that had just registered a threat. Human manufacturing is already alarming under normal circumstances. They build things at a speed and scale that most galactic species find difficult to comprehend, driven by economic systems that reward production above almost everything else. But what I witnessed on those screens was not normal manufacturing. It was something humans call total war production, and the Council classified the concept as a Category 1 civilizational hazard 11 cycles ago. Factories that had been producing consumer electronics and personal vehicles and processed food 12 hours earlier began producing weapons. Not in days, not in shifts, in hours. Assembly lines reconfigured themselves, supply chains redirected. Workers who had clocked in that morning expecting to build kitchen appliances clocked out that evening, having built the components for atmospheric defense platforms. The entire industrial output of a planet with 8 billion inhabitants pivoted to a single purpose, with a speed that our economic models said was flatly impossible. These were civilian ships, mining vessels, cargo haulers, transport shuttles, personal craft, anything that could reach orbit and carry a human being into the void. They launched from every continent, from every nation, from spaceports and airfields, and improvised launch pads that had been assembled in parking lots. Thousands of them, rising through the atmosphere in bright columns of exhaust, climbing toward a fleet of warships that outgunned them in every measurable way. They were not running. I checked the telemetry 3 times because I could not believe what I was seeing. Their trajectories were not escape vectors. They were attack vectors. Thousands of unarmed, unarmored civilian vessels, held together with improvised repairs and sheer determination, were flying directly at the Vraxian fleet. One of the analysts, a young Keth who had only been on the committee for 2 cycles, turned to me and asked why. Why would they do this? They had to know they could not win. They had to understand the mathematics. Their ships had no shields, no weapons worth mentioning, no chance of surviving an engagement with a Vraxian warship. Why were they going up? I told him something that I had learned in my first year on the committee, something that had kept me awake for a very long time after I first understood it. I told him that humans do not calculate whether they can win before they decide to fight. They calculate whether the fight matters. And if it does, they fight regardless of the odds, regardless of the cost, regardless of whether any rational analysis says they should. They have a word for it. They call it courage. But that word does not capture the full scope of what it means, because it is not just a willingness to face danger. It is a fundamental refusal to accept that danger has the right to make them stop. The Inner Council sent an emergency diplomatic packet to Admiral Tholvex aboard the Wrath of Vraxis. The message was transmitted on the highest priority channel available, with the full authority of the Galactic Council behind it. It said, in terms that could not be misunderstood, withdraw immediately. This is not a request. You do not understand what you are facing. Tholvex responded by laughing. I heard the audio. He laughed, and then he cut the channel. I drafted a personal message to my family on Keth Prime. I told them I loved them. I told them to move to the outer colonies. I told them not to wait for me. I watched a cargo hauler, a boxy, ungainly thing, with a name painted on its hull that our translators rendered as Fortune's Fool, fly directly at a Vraxian destroyer's engine section. The destroyer's point defense systems lit up, peppering the hauler with energy bursts that tore chunks from its hull. The hauler did not change course. It did not slow down. It accelerated. The collision was silent on our sensors, just a flash of data and a sudden absence where two objects had been. The destroyer's engines went dark, the hauler ceased to exist. And behind it, 100 more ships kept coming. The Vraxian tactical computers were cycling through response algorithms, and I could see from the data intercepts that they were struggling. Their combat models were built around rational opponents. Opponents who retreated when outgunned. Opponents who surrendered when defeat was certain. Opponents who valued their own survival above their objectives. The models had no category for an enemy that considered survival optional. The laughter was gone. In its place was something tight and controlled, the voice of a military commander who was beginning to realize that his understanding of the situation was catastrophically incomplete. He ordered his fleet to tighten formation. He ordered increased point defense output. He ordered his communications officer to demand reinforcements from the hegemony. I watched his fleet lose its first warship to a mining vessel that detonated its own fuel reserves against the warship's hull. The explosion was not large by military standards. It did not need to be. It was enough. And the human who piloted that mining vessel, whose name and face I would never know, had made a choice that no Vraxian combat model had ever accounted for. They chose the fight over their own life. And they were not alone in that choice. Not by a long measure. In the observation center, surrounded by diplomats and analysts and military officers from a dozen species, I sat very still and watched Earth rise. Not the planet, the people. And I understood, with a clarity that settled into my bones like cold water, that the Vraxians had not started a war. They had started a reckoning. The first 72 hours changed everything, not just for the Vraxians, for every species watching, for the Council, for me, for the comfortable assumptions we had built our entire galactic civilization on. All of it came apart in 3 days, and what emerged from the wreckage was something none of us were prepared to face. I had not slept since the attack began. My skin was a network of stress fractures from wrist to shoulder, and the medical officer attached to the observation center had stopped asking me to let her treat them, because she knew I would not leave the screens. The room smelled of exhaustion and fear, pheromones from too many species confined in too small a space for too long. 3 of the inner council members had been sedated after the first day. 2 more had quietly departed for their homeworlds without explanation. Gorath, to his credit, had not moved from his chair. He sat like a stone carving, watching the feeds, occasionally making low rumbling sounds that his translator did not pick up, and that I suspected were Torvon grief rituals. In a conventional military assessment, it should not have lasted 9 minutes. The humans had no shields, no military-grade weapons, no coordinated command structure. What they had was numbers, fury, and an absolute unwillingness to accept the obvious conclusion that they were outmatched. They fought with mining lasers and repurposed industrial cutting tools. They rammed Vraxian ships with their own hulls. They overloaded their reactors and flew into enemy formations and detonated themselves like living warheads. One vessel, a small personal craft registered to a woman named Margaret Cole, who was 63 years old, and had, according to her intercepted communication logs, been on her way to visit her grandchildren when the attack began, flew her ship directly into the engine array of a Vraxian destroyer at full acceleration. She had painted something on the hull of her craft before she launched. Our optical sensors captured it. The words read, "Maggie's Last Ride." She crippled that destroyer. Its engines went dark. Its navigational systems failed. It drifted out of formation and had to be abandoned. A 63-year-old grandmother, in a ship designed for family vacations, had single-handedly removed a warship from the battle. She was not unique. That was the part that kept me staring at the screens long after my eyes had started aching. She was not a soldier. She was not trained. She was not special by human standards. She was just a person who saw her world under attack and decided, without hesitation, without calculation, that she would rather die fighting than live knowing she did nothing. And there were thousands like her. Teachers, engineers, students, retired workers, people whose only qualification for combat was that they were human and they were angry. The Vraxians lost 19 warships to the civilian fleet, 19 military vessels, crewed by trained soldiers, equipped with the best weapons the hegemony could produce, brought down by cargo haulers and mining platforms and family shuttles. The humans lost over 600 ships, every single one of them a volunteer, every single one of them knowing exactly what they were flying into. Not under compulsion, by choice, pure, deliberate, clear-eyed choice. Most galactic species have self-preservation coded so deeply into their neurology that overriding it requires chemical intervention or extreme conditioning. Humans override it with nothing more than a feeling, a sense of duty, a love for something larger than themselves. It is, without exaggeration, the most frightening biological trait I have ever studied. They were not trying to defeat the Vraxian armada. They were buying time. Every ship that launched, every pilot who flew into fire, every grandmother who painted a farewell message on her hull, was purchasing minutes and hours for something else. Something that was happening on the surface while the galaxy watched the skies. Because while the civilian fleet fought and bled and held the Vraxian advance in check through sheer refusal to stop, Earth was building. It is a professional requirement for anyone on the observation committee, and it is also a reliable method for inducing insomnia. But in all my years of study, nothing I had read prepared me for what I watched happen in those 72 hours. Humans are fast builders under normal circumstances. During what they call wartime, they become something else entirely. Their history is full of examples. Entire fleets constructed in months, factories assembled in weeks, weapons systems designed, tested, and deployed in timeframes that our engineers say should require years. They have a term for it, the arsenal of democracy, named after a period in their history when a single nation retooled its entire economy to produce weapons for a global conflict, and did so with a speed that altered the outcome of the war. What I watched on the monitors was that concept applied on a planetary scale, amplified by 8 billion individuals, all pulling in the same direction for the first time in their species' existence. The wreckage from the first orbital engagement, the destroyed stations and satellites and Vraxian ships, began falling toward Earth's surface within hours of the battle. Before it hit the ground, human recovery teams were already in position. They did not just collect the debris, they studied it. They took apart every piece of Vraxian technology they could find, every hull fragment, every weapon component, every navigational system, and they reverse-engineered it. In 72 hours. I need to say that again because it deserves emphasis. It took humanity 3 days to understand it, copy it, and improve it. Our technical analysts were sending reports to the Inner Council in real time, and each report was more alarming than the last. The humans were not just replicating Vraxian technology. They were modifying it, adapting it, combining it with their own engineering principles in ways that the original designers had never considered. A Vraxian energy weapon is a precise, elegant instrument, designed for efficiency and reliability. The human version, built in a makeshift laboratory from salvaged components and domestic manufacturing equipment, was crude and ugly, and drew 3 times more power than it should have needed. It was also 40% more powerful than the original. That pattern repeated across every piece of technology they recovered. Human engineering is not elegant, it is not refined, it is functional in the most aggressive sense of the word, designed not for beauty but for results. And when the result they need is a weapon that hits harder than anything they had yesterday, they achieve it with a speed that borders on the impossible. The first human military vessels launched from surface dockyards on the 4th day. I watched them rise on the monitors, and I felt something I had not felt in decades of service. I felt awe. Galactic warship design is a mature art form. The great shipbuilders of the Torvan Imperium and the Azuri Federation produce vessels that are as beautiful as they are deadly, sleek lines and flowing curves, and the kind of engineering that makes you understand why some species consider their fleets works of art. Human warships look like someone took a factory, welded guns to every surface, wrapped the whole thing in armor plating, and pointed it at the enemy. They are brutal, functional, completely devoid of aesthetic consideration. They are also, as the Vraxians were about to discover, extremely effective. The first engagement between human military vessels and the Vraxian fleet took place near the outer reaches of the Sol system. They cared about reaching the enemy before the enemy reached their home again. A human commander named Daniel Harper led the first squadron. Our intercepts captured his communications with his fleet, and I listened to them with a fascination that I could not suppress despite the circumstances. He was calm, not artificially calm, not the forced steadiness of someone suppressing panic, but genuinely, naturally calm. He was giving orders in a voice that sounded like he was discussing routine maintenance, and his crew was responding in kind. They were about to engage a technologically superior enemy fleet in ships they had built less than a week ago, and they sounded like they were heading to work. Harper executed a maneuver that our tactical systems flagged as impossible. He brought his squadron around the gravity well of the system's largest gas giant at a speed that generated gravitational forces strong enough to render most species unconscious. His crew endured it, their bodies strained, Their blood vessels expanded and contracted in ways that our medical staff said should have caused permanent damage. They kept fighting. Harper used the planet's gravity to slingshot his ships into the Vraxian formation, at a velocity that the Vraxian targeting systems could not track, because the systems were calibrated for opponents who valued their own physical safety enough to avoid such maneuvers. He hit them from an angle they did not expect, at a speed they could not match. And in the first 4 minutes of the engagement, 3 Vraxian cruisers lost their primary weapon systems. I watched it happen in real time, and I noticed something that I logged in my official report, but that no summary or analysis could adequately capture. The Vraxians were fighting a battle. The humans were fighting a war. The difference is not semantic. A battle is a discrete engagement with defined parameters. You fight, you win or lose, you withdraw or advance. A war is a continuous state of directed aggression that does not end until the objective is achieved or the species waging it ceases to exist. Humans do not fight battles. They fight wars. Every engagement is a step toward a larger goal. Every sacrifice is calculated against the final outcome, and they do not stop, they do not rest, they do not reconsider, until the thing they are fighting for is won, or they are all gone. The Vraxian fleet lost a third of its ships in 6 hours. Not to superior firepower, not to better technology, to a species that had been building warships for less than a week, and was making up tactics in real time. It changes mid-engagement, adapting to conditions faster than any command structure I have ever studied can process. Harper would execute a strategy, observe the Vraxian response, discard the strategy, and implement a new one, all within minutes. His officers did the same. Every human ship was fighting its own battle, while coordinating with the fleet, a level of distributed tactical intelligence that our military analysts said should not be possible without a networked artificial intelligence coordinating the whole thing. The humans did not have a networked artificial intelligence. They had instinct, training, and each other. That was enough. I intercepted a Vraxian military communication during the 6th hour of the engagement. It was from a ship captain, whose name I will not record, because what I heard in his voice deserves a measure of dignity, regardless of what his government had done. He was reporting to Admiral Tholvex, and his voice was shaking. He said, "They will not stop. We have destroyed over 100 of their vessels, and they return with 200 more. Where are they getting these ships? We have hit them with everything we have, and they keep coming. Our targeting systems cannot predict their movements. Our tactical models cannot process their behavior. Admiral, I need reinforcements, or I need permission to withdraw. We are not fighting a military. We are fighting a planet." Tholvex did not grant permission to withdraw. It would not have mattered if he had. By that point, the human fleet had already moved to encircle the Vraxian formation, cutting off their retreat vectors with a precision that suggested they had been planning this moment for hours, while simultaneously fighting for their lives. The Vraxian fleet broke. Not all at once. It crumbled from the edges inward, ships peeling away from the formation as their captains individually decided that survival was more important than orders. They ran. They scattered into the outer system, pursued by human ships that chased them the way their ancestors had once chased prey across the plains of their homeworld, with patience and endurance, and the certain knowledge that eventually, the thing they were chasing would have to stop. I stood up from my console for the first time in hours. My legs were stiff, and my skin was a map of stress fractures, and my eyes ached from staring at screens. This silence was the silence of beings who were watching something unprecedented, and knew it, and did not have words for what they were feeling. Gorath broke the silence. He looked at me, and in his deep Torvan rumble he said, "They are not going to stop at the system border, are they?" It was not a question. "No," I said. "They are going to Varaxis," he said. "Yes," I said. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they held something I had never seen in a Torvan officer's expression before. Not fear, not admiration. Acceptance. The acceptance of someone who has just watched the balance of power in the galaxy shift permanently and irreversibly, and who understands that the universe they knew this morning no longer exists. I looked at the screens. The Vraxian fleet was in full retreat. Behind them, gaining steadily, relentlessly, inevitably, came the human fleet, growing larger with every hour as new ships launched from Earth and joined the pursuit. They were building and deploying warships faster than they were losing them. Their shipyards, assembled from asteroid material by crews of volunteers who worked in shifts that would have been considered inhumane by any labor standard in the galaxy, were producing vessels at a rate that our projections said would give them numerical superiority within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. From first contact with an alien military to numerical superiority. That was the timeline. That was what we were dealing with. The cold, deep, patient anger of a species that remembers every single one of the 11 million people who died in the initial bombardment, that has written every name down and filed it away, and will not rest until every name has been answered for. I wrote that the Vraxian hegemony had made first contact with a human military response. I wrote that the response was ongoing. I wrote that based on current trajectories, the human fleet would reach Vraxian space within 14 standard cycles. And I wrote, at the bottom of the report, a single recommendation: do not interfere. 2 weeks after the first shot was fired, I stood in the main chamber of the Galactic Council and watched a human being address the assembled representatives of 1,000 species for the first time in history. The chamber was full, every seat occupied, every delegation present. Species that had not sent ambassadors to council sessions in decades had dispatched representatives for this moment. They came not because they wanted to be here, but because they understood that what happened in this room would determine the shape of the galaxy for generations to come. She was Earth's first official ambassador to the Galactic Council, appointed 72 hours ago by a unified human government that had not existed a month before. She was tall for her species, with dark hair pulled back from her face, and steady brown eyes that moved across the chamber with a careful, measured attention that missed nothing. She wore simple clothing, no ceremonial dress, no military uniform, just a dark suit, clean and pressed, as if she were attending a business meeting, rather than the most significant diplomatic event in galactic history. She was polite. She greeted the council with appropriate formality. She acknowledged the gravity of the occasion. She thanked the delegates for their time. And then, with the warmth and composure of someone discussing the weather, she told us everything. She told us she knew about the observation committee. She named every member. She listed the surveillance satellites we had positioned in the Sol system. She described the monitoring protocols we had used. She recited the classification codes from our internal reports. She even quoted word for word from a memo I had written 9 cycles ago, recommending an increase in monitoring frequency based on advances in human computational technology. The chamber was so quiet I could hear the ventilation systems cycling. She told us she understood why we had done it. She said she bore us no ill will for the surveillance. She said humanity recognized that an unknown species with an unusual psychological profile warranted caution, and she said she would probably have recommended the same protocols if the situation had been reversed. Then she told us about the bombardment. She did not raise her voice. She did not display emotion. She stated facts. children who had been sleeping. She listed the numbers with the same calm precision she had used to list our surveillance protocols, and somehow, that calm was worse than any display of grief could have been. She said, "The Vraxians killed 11 million of our people. Mothers, fathers, children." She poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher on the speaking podium. Her hands were perfectly steady. She drank. She set the glass down. She looked at the chamber. "We do not want a wider conflict," she said. "We are not interested in conquest. We are not interested in territory. We are interested in one thing, ensuring that what happened to our people never happens again. The Vraxian military leadership will answer for what they have done. That is not negotiable." She sat down. She folded her hands in her lap. She waited. I looked around the chamber. I saw fear. I saw calculation. I saw, in a few faces, something that might have been respect. The Vraxian delegation's seats were empty. They had withdrawn from the council 2 days ago, recalled to their homeworld, to prepare for a defense that everyone in this chamber knew would not be enough. Gorath rose from his seat. The Torvan general had cleaned his uniform and straightened his posture, and he looked like the career military officer he was, rather than the shaken being who had put his head in his claws 2 weeks ago. He addressed Dr. Walsh directly. "We will not provide aid to the Vraxian hegemony, and we formally request that the human government consider the Imperium a neutral party in this conflict." not out of sympathy for humanity, out of self-preservation. Every species that had read the classified files, every government that had studied the data, every military that had watched the Battle of Seoul play out on their own sensor networks, had reached the same conclusion. Getting between humanity and its objective was a form of suicide. Three species did not reach that conclusion. The Delvani Compact, a coalition of 4 worlds that had long considered themselves the military backbone of the Galactic Order, announced that they would deploy a blockade fleet along the main transit corridor between Sol and Vraxian space. Their stated reason was galactic stability. Their actual reason, as far as I could determine from intercepted communications, was a belief that if they allowed humanity to simply march across the galaxy and dismantle a sovereign government, it would set a precedent that threatened their own position. They were not wrong about the precedent. By this point, the fleet had grown to over 400 warships, supported by a supply chain that stretched back to Earth, and was maintained by a constant stream of cargo vessels running fuel and materials and replacement parts along a route that human logisticians had mapped and optimized in real time during the transit. The organizational capacity required for that kind of sustained mobile supply operation is something that most galactic militaries develop over centuries. The humans had improvised it in less than 2 weeks. The Delvani blockade consisted of 60 warships, well-armed, well-trained, positioned in a textbook defensive formation across the transit corridor. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. Precisely, surgically. They targeted engines, weapons systems, and communication arrays with a level of accuracy that our tactical analysts said was consistent with a fleet that had been practicing coordinated fire solutions for years, not weeks. They took the Delvani ships apart without taking a single Delvani life. Then they broadcast a message on an open channel. It said, "We are not here for you. Move." The Delvani moved. 2 more species attempted to intervene. The results were similar. Precise disabling actions, no casualties. Clear, calm communications, stating that humanity's quarrel was with the Vraxian hegemony and no one else. Each time, the message was the same. We are not here for you. Move. Each time, they moved. The Vraxian hegemony, watching its potential allies and sympathizers step aside one after another, began to panic. Our intelligence intercepts showed a government in freefall, military commanders arguing with civilian leaders, evacuations ordered and then cancelled, and then ordered again. Resources redirected in contradictory patterns that suggested no central authority was making coherent decisions anymore. In one intercepted transmission, a member of the Vraxian High Command proposed activating a strategic weapon capable of rendering an entire planet uninhabitable. The channel went silent for approximately 90 seconds. When sound returned, a different voice was speaking. A human voice, speaking flawless Vraxian, with an accent that our linguists said was indistinguishable from a native speaker. The voice said, "We heard that. You have 4 hours to take the weapon apart. This is your only warning." What I know is that in that moment, every remaining illusion the Vraxians might have had about their ability to control this situation evaporated. I watched the approach on the monitors in the observation center. 412 warships, arranged in a formation that our tactical systems identified as an encirclement pattern. They surrounded the planet completely, cutting off every approach vector, every escape route, every communication relay. The Vraxian Home Defense Fleet, 240 ships that had been recalled from across the hegemony's territory, took up a defensive position in orbit. For 6 hours, nothing happened. The two fleets faced each other across the void, and the galaxy held its breath. Then Dr. Walsh's voice came through on an open channel. She addressed Admiral Tholvex directly. She said, "Admiral, you have two options. You can surrender your fleet, disband your military, and submit your leadership to a formal investigation into the attack on Earth. Or you can fight, and we will go through your fleet, and we will land on your world, and we will find your leadership ourselves. The outcome is the same. The only variable is how many of your people have to suffer before we get there. You have 1 hour." Tholvex chose to fight. It lasted 4 hours. The Vraxian home fleet fought with the desperation of a species defending its homeworld. And I will say this for them. They fought bravely. Their ships were well handled. Their coordination was professional. Under any other circumstances, against any other opponent, they might have held. They were not facing any other opponent. The human fleet took the Vraxian defense apart with the same methodical precision they had shown against the Delvani. They identified targets, disabled them, and moved to the next. Ship by ship, system by system, layer by layer. It was not a battle. It was a disassembly, performed with the patience and focus of people who had all the time in the world and absolutely no intention of stopping until the job was done. When it was over, the Vraxian fleet was crippled. Not destroyed, crippled. Engines offline. Weapons dark. Crews alive and able to be evacuated. And then the humans did the thing that I still cannot fully reconcile with everything else I know about them. They did not bomb the planet from orbit. They did not glass the surface. They did not unleash the kind of retaliatory devastation that every strategic model, every psychological profile, every historical analysis said they should. They could have. I have seen the weapons loadouts on their ships. They had the capability to render the Vraxian homeworld uninhabitable in hours. Every being in the observation center expected them to do exactly that. Instead, the humans landed ground troops. Millions of them, transported to the surface in dropships and landing craft, deployed across the planet in a coordinated occupation operation that covered every major population center, every military installation, every government facility. They came down from the sky, and they went to work, not with orbital weapons, but with boots on the ground and hands on their equipment, and the slow, bloody, difficult work of dismantling a military government, one building at a time. It was more dangerous for the humans, who faced resistance in dozens of locations and took casualties they could have avoided entirely by simply pressing a button in orbit. They chose the harder path. I asked Catherine Walsh why. I found her in a corridor outside the council chamber after the news of the landing operation reached Nexus Station. She had been working without rest for days, and it showed in the shadows under her eyes, but her voice was as steady as it had been the first time she addressed the council. She looked at me, and she said, "Because we are not them." Four words. Again. Humans seem to prefer saying everything they need to say in 4 words. The occupation of the Vraxian homeworld took 40 days. Human forces systematically disarmed the Vraxian military, secured government facilities, and arrested the members of the hegemony leadership who had ordered and approved the attack on Earth. There were confrontations, there was resistance, there were casualties on both sides, but at every stage, the human forces operated under rules of engagement that prioritized the safety of the Vraxian civilian population. They established supply lines to distribute food and medical aid to displaced civilians. They protected infrastructure. They treated wounded Vraxian soldiers alongside their own. The Vraxian leadership was transported off-world and brought before something the humans called a war crimes tribunal. A formal judicial process, conducted in public, with legal representation provided for the accused, in which every action taken by the hegemony's leadership was examined and judged according to a framework of law that the humans had built from their own history of dealing with the aftermath of terrible conflicts. The Vraxian hegemony surrendered unconditionally. Its military was dissolved. Its government was restructured under supervised elections. The process was thorough and methodical, and, by the standards of galactic history, remarkably restrained. I sat in the observation center after the surrender was formalized and stared at the blank screens. The feeds from the Sol system and Vraxian space were still active, but I was not watching them. I was thinking. Humanity had possessed the power to erase the Vraxian species from existence. They had the weapons. They had the motivation. 11 million dead. 11 million reasons to turn the Vraxian homeworld into a monument to their grief. No one would have stopped them. No one could have stopped them. And they chose, deliberately, at the cost of their own soldiers' lives, to show mercy. Not weakness. Mercy. There is a difference, and the difference matters. Weakness is the inability to act. Mercy is the choice not to act when you have every ability and every reason to do so. It requires more strength than destruction. It requires the kind of discipline that looks at rage and grief and the screaming demand for revenge and says, "No, we are better than this." And that, I realized, staring at those blank screens in a room that smelled of stress and exhaustion and the weight of everything that had changed in 26 days, was the most terrifying thing about humanity. Not their weapons, not their adaptability, not their refusal to stop. Their capacity for mercy when mercy was the hardest possible choice they could make. I picked up my stylus and began writing the next section of my report. I wrote one sentence and then stopped, because the sentence said everything. It said, destruction would have been understandable. Mercy, from a species with the power to end us all, is what will keep me awake for the rest of my life. 6 months after the war ended, I walked the corridors of Nexus Station and barely recognized the place. The station itself had not changed. Same curved hallways, same humming environmental systems, same slightly too bright lighting that made everyone look vaguely unwell regardless of their species. The architecture was identical to the day I first set foot on this station over a century ago. What had changed was everything else. Human ships were docked at the outer ring. Not warships, not this time, but trade vessels and diplomatic transports and, remarkably, civilian passenger craft. Tourism. Humans were visiting Nexus Station as tourists, 6 months after fighting a war that had reshaped the balance of power in the galaxy. They wandered the corridors in small groups, pointing at things, taking photographs with their personal devices, asking questions of station staff who responded with the careful politeness of people who were still not entirely sure whether to be fascinated or terrified. I passed a pair of them near the observation gallery, a man and a woman, young, holding hands. The man was trying to read an information display in Galactic Standard and getting every third word wrong. The woman was laughing at his attempts. They looked happy, relaxed, completely at ease, in a place where, half a year ago, every species in attendance had been quietly calculating how to survive what their civilization was about to do to the galaxy. The dissonance between what they are capable of and what they choose to do on any given Tuesday. They built warships in a week, and then went back to arguing about which of their sports teams was better. They fought their way across the galaxy, and then sent tourists to take pictures of the place where the decision to let them do it was made. They are simultaneously the most dangerous and the most disarmingly normal species I have ever encountered, and the combination makes my head hurt in a way that no Keth physician has been able to treat. I am writing this account because I believe someone must, not the official report. I have written dozens of those, and they will sit in classified archives and be read by analysts and policymakers and future members of whatever committee replaces the one I spent 32 years serving on. This account is different. This is my attempt to explain, to whoever reads it in whatever future awaits us, what it felt like to watch everything change. What it felt like to be the person in the room who knew what was coming and could not stop it, and is now living in the world that came after. The Galactic Council has a new member. Humanity was granted full membership status by a vote of 947 to 3, with 12 abstentions. Their delegation occupies a position in the center of the main chamber, in seats that were previously empty and reserved for what the Council's founders optimistically called a future-worthy addition. I do not know if the founders envisioned an addition quite like this one, but the seats fit, and the humans seem comfortable in them. Dr. Catherine Walsh, is their permanent representative. She attends every session, participates in every debate, and votes on every resolution with a thoughtfulness and engagement that has earned her the grudging respect of delegates who were prepared to resent her presence. She is building relationships, making allies, learning the political landscape of the council with the same speed and thoroughness that her species applied to learning how to build warships from scrap metal. I watch her sometimes, from my seat across the chamber. She catches me watching, and she smiles, and I smile back, and I think about how strange it is that I have come to consider a member of the most dangerous species in the galaxy something close to a friend. The galaxy itself is different now, and the changes go deeper than politics. Human ships patrol the major trade routes, not in force, not as an occupying fleet, but in small squadrons that rotate through on regular schedules. Piracy along those routes has dropped to near zero, not because the human ships are everywhere, but because pirates know they could be. The threat of human intervention has done more for trade security in 6 months than the Council's enforcement programs achieved in 60 years, and the humans accomplished it simply by showing up and being themselves. 3 species have formally requested alliance pacts with Earth. The Torvan Imperium was the first, which surprised no one who understood Gorath's pragmatic approach to shifting power dynamics. The Azuri Federation followed, drawn by humanity's demonstrated capacity for both strength and restraint. The third was the Pelori Communion, the same species whose delegate fled the council chamber on the first day. Their ambassador told me, privately, that her government had spent 2 months analyzing every piece of data from the war and had concluded that the safest place in the galaxy was standing next to humanity rather than across from it. 12 more species are in various stages of negotiation. The old alliances and power blocks that defined galactic politics for centuries are dissolving and reforming around a new center of gravity. It is not conquest. The humans have not demanded fealty or tribute or territorial concessions. They have simply become the most significant factor in every strategic calculation that every government in the galaxy makes. And the weight of that significance is reshaping everything. I expected hoarding. I expected leverage. Every species in galactic history that has achieved a technological advantage has used it as a bargaining chip, extracting concessions and building influence through selective sharing. The humans are giving it away. Not all of it, obviously. They kept their military innovations close, which shows a level of strategic thinking that I find reassuring. But their medical technology, their agricultural systems, their energy production methods, and their manufacturing techniques are being shared openly through a program they call foreign aid. The term is borrowed from their own history, from a period when their wealthier nations provided resources to less developed ones, and the parallels are both obvious and instructive. A pylori child who would have died from a genetic condition last year is alive today because a human geneticist volunteered to spend 6 months on the pylori homeworld developing a treatment protocol. An Azuri agricultural colony that was facing crop failure received a human-designed soil remediation system that restored productivity within a single growing season. These are not grand gestures. They are small, practical, targeted interventions, and they are accumulating into something much larger than any single act. The Council's old guard calls it soft power. They use the term with a mixture of admiration and unease, because they recognize the strategy even as they acknowledge that it is working. Every world that receives human aid is a world that owes humanity a debt of goodwill. Every life saved is a relationship built. Every problem solved is a demonstration that humanity offers something more valuable than military protection. They offer partnership, and partnership, freely given, is a bond stronger than any treaty. The same 12 species that voted to classify humanity 3 decades ago are gathered in the same secure room where we used to review monitoring reports and debate threat assessments. The atmosphere is different now. The fear is still there, underneath everything, a permanent undercurrent that I suspect will take generations to fade. But layered on top of it is something more complex: uncertainty, possibility, the uncomfortable recognition that the species we spent 30 years trying to contain has turned out to be exactly the kind of ally we always needed and never dared hope for. The discussion is frank. Several delegates argue for a new containment strategy, updated for post-war realities. They are outvoted, not because containment is unpopular, but because everyone in the room knows it is impossible. You cannot contain a species that just demonstrated its ability to cross the galaxy, defeat a major military power, and restructure a sovereign government in less than a month. Containment is a strategy for species that do not know what they are capable of. Humanity knows exactly what it is capable of now, and so does everyone else. Others argue for full integration. Bring humanity into every institution, every committee, every framework of galactic governance. Make them partners. Make them stakeholders. Give them so much responsibility that they are too busy managing the galaxy to consider conquering it. It is a clever strategy, and I suspect it will be the one the Council eventually adopts, though I note with some amusement that it is essentially the same approach humans use when they adopt a restless animal and keep it occupied with tasks and toys so it does not chew the furniture. He says what he has been saying since the day the Vraxian fleet entered Sol space. He says, "We do whatever they want, and we hope they continue to want peace." My skin has healed from the stress fractures of the war period. My sleep has improved, though I still dream about sensor displays and fleet trajectories some nights. I am old, even by Keth standards, and I have seen enough history to know that this moment, this transition, this fragile and extraordinary period of change, is the most important thing I will ever witness. I find myself near the observation gallery, the long curved window that looks out on the stars and the docked ships, and the slow rotation of the station against the backdrop of the galaxy. There is a human family there, a woman and a small child, a girl who cannot be more than 4 or 5 years old by human reckoning. The child is pressing her face against the viewport, her breath fogging the transparent surface, her eyes wide with wonder. Her mother is standing behind her, one hand on the child's shoulder, smiling with a softness that seems impossible to reconcile with everything I know about what her species did in the last 6 months. She is not a soldier, she is not a diplomat. She is a mother who brought her daughter to see the stars, and in that simple act, she is doing something that no amount of military force or technological superiority or political maneuvering could accomplish. She is being normal, she is being kind, she is being the version of humanity that exists between the wars and the miracles, the version that plants gardens and reads bedtime stories, and worries about whether their children are eating enough vegetables. The version that is so ordinary, so unremarkable, so quietly and stubbornly alive, that it makes everything else, the weapons, the fury, the impossible feats of engineering and endurance, seem like aberrations rather than the norm. But I know better. I know that the mother and the soldier are the same person, that the woman smiling at her daughter and the species that crossed the galaxy to answer an attack are not contradictions, but aspects of the same extraordinary, terrifying, beautiful whole. Humans contain everything: the tenderness and the rage, the creativity and the destruction, the mercy and the capability for overwhelming force. They carry all of it, every day, in bodies that are fragile and minds that are relentless, and they somehow manage to hold it together through nothing more than willpower and love and the stubborn belief that tomorrow will be worth showing up for. Catherine Walsh finds me standing near the gallery. She looks tired, but well, the kind of tired that comes from meaningful work rather than crisis. She asks if I am all right. I tell her I am writing a historical account of the war and its aftermath. She nods and asks what I am calling it. I tell her the title. They are attacking Earth? I say, the Galactic Council watched in horror. She laughs. A real, warm, human laugh, the kind that crinkles the corners of her eyes and makes her look 10 years younger. She says, "Make sure you include the part where we were scared too. People always forget that. They see what we did, and they think we were not afraid. We were afraid the entire time. We were afraid every single day. We just did not let it stop us." She puts a hand on my arm, a casual gesture of connection that humans do without thinking, and that still catches me off guard every time. She walks away down the corridor, and I watch her go. The little girl at the viewport has noticed me. She turns from the stars and looks up at me with the open, curious, fearless expression that human children seem to wear as a default setting. She has dark hair and bright eyes, and a gap where one of her front teeth should be, and she is looking at me, a four-armed, gray-skinned alien twice her height, with nothing in her face but delight. She waves at me. I wave back, with all four arms. She giggles and turns back to the stars, pressing her nose against the viewport again, and her mother laughs and pulls her close, and the galaxy spins on outside the window, vast and cold and full of wonders and dangers, and in this small corner of it, a human child is looking at the universe, and seeing not a threat to be managed, or a resource to be claimed, but a place full of things she has not discovered yet. I stand there for a long time after they leave. I think about my report. I think about the 32 years I spent watching humanity from a distance, cataloging their behaviors, analyzing their patterns, writing memos about threat levels and containment protocols. I think about how all of that study, all of that careful observation, failed to capture the thing that matters most about them. They are not a threat to be managed. They are not a weapon to be feared. They are not a problem to be solved. They are people. Strange, complicated, infuriating, magnificent people who contain within themselves the capacity for both the worst and the best that the universe has ever seen, and who choose, more often than not, with an optimism that defies every rational analysis, to reach for the best. I pull out my recording device and speak the final lines of my account into it. I have cataloged 600 sentient species across a galaxy that is older than any of us can comprehend, and I tell you now, with the certainty of a being who has seen the fire in their eyes and the gentleness in their hands, that humanity is not the species the galaxy expected. They are louder than we wanted, more stubborn than we planned for, more dangerous than we feared. I think of Catherine Walsh, steady-handed and warm-voiced, offering mercy where annihilation was the easier path. and they are not going anywhere. And I have decided, after 112 cycles of caution and observation, and carefully maintained distance, that I am glad. I turn off the recorder. I stand at the viewport where the child stood. I look out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Earth is spinning, blue and green and white, fragile and beautiful, a tiny speck in an ocean of black, home to 8 billion contradictions wrapped in skin and stubbornness and hope. They are the most terrifying species I have ever known. They are also the most wonderful. And if the galaxy is wise, and I am not certain that it is, it will stop trying to understand them and simply be grateful that when they reached for the stars, they chose to bring the rest of us with them. This is the story of how the galaxy changed. And this is my testimony that if I had to live through it all again, every terrifying, awe-inspiring, heartbreaking, magnificent moment of it, I would not change a single thing. Except perhaps I would wave back sooner.